thank you all for being here this morning. So we've got a good crowd today. I'd love a show of hands how many of you have been upstairs to see Collected in person. All right, almost everyone. That's fantastic. As Kemi said, today is all about Collected, and this presentation is going to jump into those behind-the-scenes stories about the exhibit, my personal experience working on the exhibit, our goals, and what's coming in the next few years for this exhibit as well. But afterwards, I would love to see you upstairs. I'll be there for about 30 minutes, and I'm happy to give you a tour, tell you even more, or answer additional questions that you might have. I'm also going to reserve some time at the end of today's talk for questions from the audience. So today just happens to be the 4-month anniversary of Collected's opening to the public, which is very exciting. Last week, we welcomed our 60,000th visitor to this exhibit in 4 months. And I think that's really evidence that this exhibit is speaking to St. Louis and speaking to our audience in a really unique way. And that's because this exhibit is not quite like anything we've done before. This exhibit is an innovative approach to storytelling through artifacts for us. Our main goal with this was to share more of the collection than we ever have before with our guests by getting the collection out of storage and into the galleries in ways that allow people to interact with it on a constantly evolving and growing basis. This exhibit is a chance for us to share St. Louis's history and St. Louis's present day stories through the artifacts that speak to the people, the places, and the defining moments from this region's history. And there are things associated with some of the biggest names that you would immediately recognize, like Lewis and Clark in this gallery. But there are also so many artifacts that speak to the powerful and moving everyday experiences of St. Louisans from the past in a very unique way. There are more than 80 artifacts in Collected, and I am excited to say that about half of those artifacts have never been on display before. Some of them we've only had for a year and a half. Some of them we've had since 1913, and they've been waiting on their chance in the spotlight, and Collected is certainly that moment. There are a couple of things that make Collected very special, and I just want to point your attention to those. The first of which is a special feature gallery within the exhibit. So Collected itself is not a thematic or chronological approach to sharing this region's history. It takes you artifact by artifact and allows you to deep dive into each object's individual story. But in the feature gallery, we have an opportunity to tell stories about specific elements of our collection or moments from St. Louis history in a more traditional storytelling way. And this gallery will actually change out every year to feature a new theme. If you go upstairs right now, that focus is on children's clothing and what it means to grow up in St. Louis. It's called The Life of Kids' Clothes, and it pulls from our collection of thousands of children's garments to talk about unique experiences of childhood and milestones and celebrations of growing up, and how the experience of being a kid has changed dramatically from the 19th century to the 20th century to the present day. And at the end of today's presentation, I'm going to give you a sneak peek into the exhibit that comes to this space next February. There's also a few other things that make this exhibit very special, one of which is, I think, really well exemplified by the section of Collected that showcases original prints and photographs from our collection. If you know anything about our collection, you know it's vast. You've probably seen our online collection search where there are hundreds of thousands of things to explore from our collections. But a lot of people don't know that just our prints and photographs collection alone contains more than 1 million images. It's an incredibly vast collection. Oftentimes, however, in the exhibits that we put on the floor, we use reproductions or reprints of the original photographs and prints in the exhibit to preserve the originals and keep them safe from unnecessary light exposure. So that is great for the collection. It helps us care for it long term. But what it means is that oftentimes for these delicate artifacts, visitors to our exhibits don't get to see the original piece. They don't get to see that, original historic photograph. In Collected, however, because this is a collection showcase focused on getting more of our collection out, you won't see any reproductions. There are no copies of the original. So I love that in this space of Collected dedicated to our prints and photographs collection, you will see only the original historic photographic prints. And to do that, we're also changing them out regularly to avoid that light exposure that could damage them. So every 3 months, every 4 months, we're putting a completely new set of photographs out. And that's the case not just for the photographs and documents and other paper-based materials, but it's also what we're doing with our clothing and textiles and other objects in the gallery. So every time you return to Collected, there will be something incredible that you can experience that wasn't in the gallery the last time you were here. It's also a chance for us to showcase parts of our collection that some people don't even realize we have, like our vast moving images collection. And in the center of the gallery is a theater that showcases 3 films from the Moving Images collection. And every year we will rotate through a new selection of 3 films that you can come and sit down and experience. And these are from very different time periods, very different subject matter, so that there's always something that's going to catch your attention, appeal to you no matter what your interest is. So right now in the theater, there is a 1927 black and white silent film that shows Charles Lindbergh's triumphant return to St. Louis after his transatlantic flight. Shows the ticker tape parade, shows his speech on Art Hill, him raising the Cardinals pennant from their World Series win the year prior. It's really fun peek into St. Louis in 1927 and the fervor that swept the city as Charles Lindbergh returned a hero. And then the second film that's in there is an episode of the very nostalgic St. Louis-produced educational television show called The Letter People. And the third is an art film made right here in St. Louis that shows scenes of the St. Louis Zoo awakening in the morning with the early light and the first visitors arriving at the zoo. And over top of that is free jazz performed by a St. Louis group. And they improvise their jazz based on the scenes that are unfolding in front of them, the elephants, the flamingos. It's really fun. I talked a little bit about the size of the collection and how Collected is a chance for us to showcase that collection. And to do that, we really had a lot of collaboration across the departments that care for our collections. We had our archivists, our librarians, our curators, all coming together to bring their perspective on the collection to our meetings, where we were able to start deciding what would become part of this innovative exhibit. And that was not an easy process. As I mentioned earlier, the collection is vast, more than 1 million prints and photographs. Our objects collection is over 170,000 objects, and we have hundreds of collections of archives and so much more. So this required a really fun time of exploration into our collection, not just to pull together the beloved pieces that are really well known and beloved by staff and the public alike, but to really mine deep into the collection to uncover those stories, uncover those artifacts, those documents, those images that had not been used in exhibits before, but were really powerful and offered some incredible storytelling opportunities. And this process was not a quick one. So I arrived at the Missouri Historical Society in 2018 and started working on Collected really soon thereafter. And even though I started working on Collected in 2018, this idea for a celebration of our collection through an exhibit had been around for many years prior to me. It had been talked about at least since 2012 or 2013 by various staff. So what we needed was someone to kind of come in and pull this project together, and that was my role. So even though I was the project lead, I can by no means take credit for this exhibition in its entirety, because it would not have been possible without a lot of dedication and knowledge and insight from many staff who work here, or former staff members as well, and volunteers and interns. So pulling the collections together was my job, and I'm a spreadsheet person. I love a good spreadsheet, and that was what I turned to first. So I was getting these lists of ideas from some of our staff, and when you're in the brainstorm phase, that can take you anywhere. So we had some really fun ideas being thrown around, but I knew that not everything could fit in the exhibit, and I knew that we were looking at future rotations for this exhibit. So we had to decide what would be in the gallery when the exhibit opened in March of 25, but what would we bring to the gallery in the years after to make sure that it always stays fresh and exciting. So I pulled together everyone's ideas in a massive spreadsheet. I color-coded them based on the size of the artifact, based on, and then arranged them based on time period for this particular spreadsheet, so that we could see if we were maybe over-representing a specific time period or under-representing a specific time period. We also looked at the stories and themes from these individual artifacts and tried to make sure that we were representing as much of the collection as we could, but also the diversity of the St. Louis region's history. We also had a lot of fun brainstorming opportunities with other staff who don't work directly with the collection, who may work directly with our visitors or with our programming. And we had some great brainstorms with members of the public and volunteers as well, who were able to kind of tell us, okay, what are you hearing from people about what they want to see when they come to the History Museum? So we were bringing all of this input together. And then another way that we also started to narrow down what would be in the final product that's on the floor is by conservation need and sometimes by size. So this is an absolutely amazing piece in our collection. It's just one little photo of a many foot-long document. And this was originally proposed to go into Collected. It turned out to be too delicate to put on exhibit. The paper it was printed on was really never meant to survive long term. So it has degraded over the years since this was printed. This is actually the original document that was sent to a news station here in St. Louis that announced to the newsroom President Kennedy's assassination. And over this many foot-long document, as these news bulletins were coming into the newsroom, you can read the development of the Kennedy assassination story as it was unfolding. It's a really amazing document. But as I said, this was meant to be a temporary thing. These news bulletins weren't meant to be preserved and saved long term. They were really meant to be used in the moment and then thrown away. And so here we are all of these decades later trying to preserve this, and what it meant is that any amount of light exposure would be too much for it, so it didn't go into the exhibit. Another thing we wanted to put in Collected, but is not there right now, is one of our larger objects in the collection and one of my personal favorites. It is an Ozark Airlines DC-9 cockpit trainer, and it is such a cool piece because today, training a pilot is such a high-tech endeavor. You know, there are these simulations, and it's a very tech-centered process that allows pilots to get experience before they're launched into the air to pilot a passenger airplane. But in this Ozark Airlines DC-9 cockpit trainer, there is no high-tech element. It is just a wooden and plastic fake cockpit that pilots were trained on how to fly these massive jets. And so it's such a cool piece of airline history right here in St. Louis, but it is huge. And so we decided that do we want one of this at the expense of maybe 5 or 6 other things? And we ended up deciding that, well, for now at least, the cockpit trainer is going to stay in storage. Once we had our artifact list selected and narrowed down to what we felt would fit in the exhibit and give visitors a sense of the immensity of St. Louis's history, but also the Missouri Historical Society's collection, it was time for a lot of research. And one of my favorite things about the research phase of an exhibit or a book or a program is going down these really fun, we sort of call them rabbit holes, to see where the research takes you. And it's those hours that you get to spend exploring the primary sources, exploring the history of these artifacts in the city that leads to some absolutely fascinating experiences. And 2 stories that I thought of when I was prepping for this presentation today are here on the screen. So when you go into Collected, one of the first artifacts you'll see in the intro section is the Nobel Prize in Chemistry from 2001 that was awarded to a St. Louis chemist named William Knowles. And William Knowles received the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for his contributions that led to the creation of L-DOPA drugs, or drugs that treat Parkinson's. And to me, that's incredibly powerful because I know several people who have Parkinson's, and almost everyone I know either loves someone or has someone in their social circle who also has Parkinson's. So this is such a relevant contribution to science that happened right here in St. Louis. And it's incredibly powerful to be able to have that Nobel Prize in our collection. But to tell Dr. Knowles' story, I was able to pull from the collection of archival materials of his that we have. So not only do we have the prize itself, but we also have Dr. Knowles' journal that he kept the year he received the prize. And it's really fun because he documents every single day and sometimes multiple times a day, what was happening in this journey that he was on from the time that he was notified that he was a Nobel Prize recipient in October of 2001, all the way to the ceremony in Sweden in December. And so I got to read his personal journal and sort of follow along this roller coaster with him. And this is one entry that I really enjoyed, where he goes into some depth about a BBC program that he was part of, and he has a bit of a critique. He thinks it could have been better mediated, but he also thinks that if he were to do it again, he could do much better, and it feels so relevant to me. I often have that thought, if I could do that a second time, I know I'd do better. This over here is a photograph that you will see in the exhibit. This is not a photograph that's part of our collection. However, it relates to part of a timeline of highlights from St. Louis's German-American history that we feature in the gallery near an artifact that was used by a St. Louis German choral society. And so we wanted to use that artifact as a bit of a springboard to talk about not just that choral society's history, but to also talk about St. Louis and Missouri's incredibly rich German history and heritage. So I knew that I wanted to highlight our partnership with Stuttgart, Germany as our sister city from 1960. And St. Louis's first sister city program was actually our partnership with Stuttgart. And I had read that there was a special commemorative sidewalk mosaic that they had in Germany to honor St. Louis. And I wanted to showcase a photo of that in the exhibit, but it turned out to be quite difficult to find an image of that sidewalk mural. And believe it or not, the museum was not willing to send me to Germany just to take a picture myself. So I knew that I would have to find one online. And I found this blog post where someone had used the image, and I thought, great, I could get permission from the owner of the blog to use it. So I reached out to the person who wrote the blog. This post was many years old by this point. And he finally got back to me and said, you know what? That's actually not my photo. I found it on Reddit. And I said, oh, okay. Can you connect me with who has the photo on Reddit? And it took a little bit of digging, but he was able to find the original poster of the image on Reddit. I was able to find a way to contact that person who lives in Southern Illinois, and they were generous enough to give us an image and permission to use it in the exhibit. And so it was just so much fun to go down this rabbit hole looking for this very specific image that I knew I wanted to feature that we didn't have already, and then be able to meet all of these different fascinating individuals in the process. So there are countless amazing rabbit holes that you go down doing an exhibit, and I wish I could feature more of them here, but if you want to talk upstairs after the program, I'd be happy to share more. I mentioned earlier that Collected brought together a lot of staff. We had more than 12 staff members who directly contributed to the content and curation of the exhibit. That doesn't include all of the other staff members who had a different role to play in bringing this exhibit to the floor. That's just folks who worked on the content and curation side of it. But we also knew that Collected wasn't just about our own perspectives on the collection. It wasn't just about the staff, the Missouri Historical Society's understanding of these artifacts. We knew that it was so important to bring in community perspectives as well, and to highlight the voices of people who have a unique lived experience connection to the stories we were sharing through the exhibit. So we worked with many outside folks who were generous enough to contribute, in many cases, quotes that are featured upstairs in the gallery so that you can read not just the labels written by staff, but you can read quotes from people who have a very unique, very personal connection to what we're talking about. And a couple of my favorites are from Colleen Starkloff, who speaks about the Heartland Disability Rights March next to a t-shirt commemorating the Heartland Disability Rights March here in St. Louis. And I also love the quote from Tracy Rain, who is a staff member at the Endangered Wolf Center, and she helped us with the interpretation for Anna, the Mexican wolf. And Anna's story is so special to staff and to the region. And Tracy's unique perspective, having worked with Anna from her birth to being with Anna the day she died, allowed us to have a very one-of-a-kind insight into who Anna was as a wolf. And I think that's so much fun. I mentioned earlier that with the Kennedy teletype document, that it wasn't able to be displayed because of conservation concerns. However, a lot of things that we are able to display also had conservation concerns and needed some conservation work from skilled professionals. And one of my favorite conservation stories working on Collected was the conservation of the Nuremberg Chronicle. The Nuremberg Chronicle is a very rare early book that was published using movable type, which was quite innovative at the time in 1493. And it combines text and images in a masterful way that really had not been seen up until that point. And so this is kind of an absolute landmark volume in print history. And it's so cool that we have this book in our collection from 1493. It's the oldest thing in the exhibit currently. And when we got ready to look at this piece for exhibition, we had a conservator come in and look at it and tell us that among some other issues, its binding was incredibly fragile and was not in good shape and needed conservation work to allow us to open it up and have it in the gallery so that visitors could see each page. And so Noah Smuts, who is a local book and paper conservator, did the work on this volume, and it was a huge opportunity for us to be able to go into his conservation studio and actually watch him do some of the work on this volume, get to ask him questions about the process, understand what the volume needed and what his thought processes were. And in following up with him after the conservation of the book was complete, he said that this was actually one of his favorite conservation projects he had ever done because of the importance of this volume and the age of the volume and just how fascinating the images are. He said he kept getting distracted by what was on the page in a way he doesn't normally with books. And so I think that you too, if you go upstairs and spend a moment with this volume, will also be quite distracted by what's on the page because it is immensely fascinating. But what you won't see is the spine of the book because it's laying on its spine in a cradle. But just know that many, many hours of work went into this volume to ensure that it was stable enough to be displayed. One of the most important aspects of our exhibits is the design process that goes into bringing curators' ideas to life and making sure that things have a place in the gallery. Design covers everything from the walls, the casework, some of the lighting, but also the spacing of everything. As you can see up here, in this diagram, our designer for this project, Nicole D'Orazio, knew each artifact and gave each artifact a special place in the exhibit and custom designed all of the casework and the mounts that would be there with our mount maker and brought this to life. Before, it was just a spreadsheet, but when the design phase started, it actually began taking shape. And so what you can't see on this slide is the detail of dimensions that were provided for every bit of the 6,000 square feet upstairs. It's hard to see, but all of these red lines have numbers with them that tell exactly how far apart from each other every one of these paintings on our paintings wall should be. And that would later allow us to install everything flawlessly. You know, if you're at home hanging a picture, you might hang it up and decide that's not exactly how you want it, and you want to move it 3 inches over or 3 inches up. I am sure that many of you, I am not the only one in this room who does that. Many of you have hung something only to realize it wasn't quite right. Well, we don't do that because every hole in the wall is, a problem. It could show, it's difficult to patch. So everything has to be planned down to the 1/8 of an inch as to exactly where that painting will hang. And it's the designer who's responsible for making sure that all of that is flawlessly executed into fabrication and installation documents. And not only that, but our designers also render their exhibit designs in 3D, like you see down here in the corner, so that you can experience the gallery in almost a walkthrough style to understand the flow and the space as the visitor will be able to experience it once it's built. And so that allows us to go in and look at kind of, your vistas, what you'll see as you're looking at one thing, what will be in the background. It allows us to make sure that we have all of our flow paths ADA accessible and so much more. One of my favorite parts about the design process of Collected is the graphic design phase. So that's where we start to format all of the colors and the fonts and the labels that you'll see. It's where we start laying out with the designer and the graphic designer. Okay, these words will go here, this image will go here, we're gonna have a pattern and a color over here. It's so much fun. But I will say, it's fun for me because I didn't have to take on the brunt of that work. Nicole took on the brunt of that work, and one of my favorite things is watching her figure out with the graphic designer all of the colors that would be in the gallery. And so that's what you see happening over here. I calculated that day. This was a multi-hour color-focused meeting for the exhibit. And I calculated that Nicole and our graphic designers reviewed 10,550 color swatches to make sure that everything was correct. And you might say 10,550? How in the world? But when you realize that the color that we select for the exhibit will be applied in multiple different formats and different substrates, you have to make sure that all of those colors match. If you're gonna put the purple color on paint, you have to make sure it matches that same purple color that's printed on vinyl, that is printed on fabric, that's printed on metal. And so Nicole and the graphic designers worked tirelessly to ensure that the exhibit looked seamless and flawless and picture perfect, which I think you'll agree with me that it very much does. Another thing that's really important to our exhibit process is accessibility. And so as we are working on curating an exhibit, every step of the way, we are thinking, how can we ensure that visitors who use a wheelchair, that visitors who are blind or have low vision, can experience this exhibit in a meaningful way? And one of the opportunities that we have is to take artifacts and 3D print them into tactile models that people can feel to understand better the artifact that's in the case in front of them. And so one of the pieces that we did this for is the sledge that was used on Admiral Peary's final attempt to reach the North Pole in 1909. And you can see the tactile model printed in plastic here that says, "Please touch." But to do that, we had to bring in someone with a special handheld scanner to actually scan, take hundreds and hundreds of photographs of every inch of this sledge so that then it could be put into a computer model and printed on a 3D printer. And watching that process happen was absolutely fascinating, but it ensured that visitors who might not be able to see the sledge in front of them would be able to experience that object. We also do things like have audio description for the exhibition, where you can actually listen to a narrator describe everything in the exhibit. There's braille labels, there's a sensory map of where you might hear sound or light, and so it's a really important part of our process. And then, of course, there's the actual installation. So this is a very, very exciting phase where you get to see all of those plans that were on paper or on a computer screen come to life. And one of my favorite things is when you actually get to place the artifact into the case and see all of this work for years come to fruition. And my favorite artifact, I think, that we were able to place into the exhibit is actually this racing boat model that you can see being put into a case right here. And the mount maker designed a mount that's kind of at an angle so that the boat model looks like it's perhaps coming right out of the case at you. And to me, that's a part of the exhibit process that doesn't often get a lot of notice is the mounts, because ideally, if a mount is really good, you're not gonna see it. But it really contributes to how the show looks. And so that was one of my favorites that we did. So I want to spend a couple of minutes and talk about three of my favorite artifacts upstairs. Now, I am one of those people that if you ask me today what my favorites are, I'll tell you three things. And then if you ask me next week what my favorites are, it might be three different things. But when I was compiling this slide, I had three things that I wanted to feature today. One of them is the smallest item in the exhibit, and it is this baby tooth. You can actually see me here. I was holding it with my gloved hands as we were getting ready for the exhibit, and it was just impossibly small. In fact, it's so small that when I took a photo of this tour in the gallery looking at the case with the baby tooth, you can't even tell that there's anything in the case. But it's an powerful artifact that truly, unlike any other, continues to impact our lives today. So when you go upstairs later, if you haven't taken time to look at that case that looks almost empty because the baby tooth is so small, please do. I'll be standing not too far away from it when you go upstairs. Another of my favorites is this wood burning done by a local artist named William Burton Jr. And the piece that Burton did is this portrait, this portrait of James Milton Turner.
My pyrography
that's
work
on display
is pretty much the
exhibit.
same how I work in my painting.
Thank you. Is this piece that's on display in the exhibit, the portrait of James Milton Turner. James Milton Turner was a St. Louisan who was born enslaved in the 1840s. And he became an advocate of education. He became an activist. He became an educator. And he also became the first African American to be a United States diplomat. He was the ambassador to Liberia. And his story is incredible. But what's also incredible is the artwork itself. It looks like it could be a drawing, but it's actually pyrography. It's done with wood burning. And I found that so fascinating that I wanted to talk to the artist more about his work and why he works in pyrography. And I knew that this was important for visitors to be able to understand and see the work that goes into pyrography. So we were able to actually go to Burton's studio. We spent about 8.5 hours one Saturday with a film crew you see here in the center at his studio and filmed him working so that we could bring that into the media piece that's in the gallery you see right below the portrait and connect visitors not just with James Milton Turner's story, but with William Burton's story as an artist. And so I'm going to show that media piece now.
My pyrography work is pretty much the same how I work in my painting. In wood burning, it's like I'm working in monochromatic work as well. A sepia tone. And so, likewise, what I try to do is set up strong contrast to make the piece more interesting. Let me introduce what I have. This particular one is for shading. These two are for line works. Because these are so small and they're more for, designated for detail work, I needed something that would cover large areas. This particular one is from 1940. This is from the 1950s. And these are vintage soldering tools, and each one has a different texture and burn that they present. I like images that may have a story behind it. And this is an image from circa 1932 Mississippi. It's a young man drinking from a water spout. I sketch it out on the wood first. I like to use a couple of different types of wood. The best woods to burn on are softer woods. This particular wood is a sand ply. I use birch, and I also use basswood and pine. I try to burn deep and hard, so it lasts a lot longer. And sometimes I can improvise. I have to be a little more deliberate with the wood burning as opposed to the painting. I have to know exactly what I want because there's no going back. If anyone is interested in wood burning, this is not a medium for someone who's in a rush. Wood burning or pyrography is unforgiving, so you have to know where you want that burn to be. It has to be deliberate. Sometimes, there's a piece that I start on and, I had one idea for it and it might change to a whole another direction. I'm gonna use this other one and show you this other technique that I use as like a crosshatch technique. Now this one right here that I'm using a solid tip burner on this, what I'm using now. So in this technique, I kind of use more of like a cross hatching. This is the one I use to primarily do a lot of my detail shadings, my detail work. I can talk to everybody when it comes to art. We all become like-minded people, interested and bound by this medium. I wanted to tell stories. It made me start to reflect on who I am as an artist, who I am as a black man, and what I want to portray in my art, and what kind of legacy I wanted to leave behind. Art is needed in the world. And when you take it away, and you got all this craziness.
featuring William Burton as part of the interpretation for that piece brought such a depth of appreciation for his work and for the portrait that's on display in the gallery. And that's what happened every time we worked with a community partner for Collected. Another powerful example of that is the treaty with the Great and Little Osage Nation from 1808 that is in the gallery. This is an original handwritten copy of a treaty or land cession where the Great and Little Osage Nation signed the treaty with the United States government at Fort Clark in Missouri. And that was the first of a series of treaties that would eventually completely remove the Osage from the present-day state of Missouri. It's a powerful moment in history and a powerful document. And we were able to work with Dr. Andrea Hunter, who is the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Osage Nation, to share with visitors not what this document means to the Missouri Historical Society staff, our curators, but to share what it means to the Osage people today. And so when we go upstairs, I encourage you to take a few moments and to read Dr. Hunter's label here on the front of the case. What we hope Collected does is inspire you to come back. Because as I said earlier, every time you return, if you come back this fall, you will see new pieces that were not here today when you're in the gallery. So come back to Collected. But we also hope that it inspires you to keep exploring our collection. And there are a couple of ways to do that. So one of our newest ways is through our curated collections. So if you go to our website, you can click on the homepage on curated collections, and that will bring you to a special portal where you can explore by time period or topic a vast number of incredible pieces from the collection and from St. Louis history. So I encourage you to do that. But also, this collection is built not just for exhibits, it's built for research and for people to connect with their history through the objects, through the papers, through the photographs. So please come and visit us at the Library and Research Center on Skinker Boulevard. That is open to the public, and it's a great place to start your research into your house history, into your family's history, into your neighborhood or organization's history as well. And then I promised earlier on that this presentation would end with a sneak peek at what was coming into the gallery next. So I want to highlight 5 pieces that will be coming into Collected in the next 6 months to 9 months. One of those pieces is a fantastic garment that was produced here in our garment industry in St. Louis. This is a junior wear ensemble that was designed by Doris Dodson. And one of my favorite things about this piece is you can't see in the photograph, but there are chipmunks all over the skirt. And the story of this piece is really the story of the peak of St. Louis's garment production days. So it's a great way to explore that moment in the city's history that really had a nationwide and even global impact. This lion statue down here is actually a maquette, a scale model of the lion gates that are at the entrance to University City on Del Mar. And these gates were designed and made by Julian Zolnay, an artist here in St. Louis. And these are some of the maquettes that he produced working through his eventual final design. And so we'll be able to talk about his art, these gates' history, and the history of University City, a fascinating St. Louis suburb. If you see the quilt that's upstairs and Collected now, that will only be out for a few short more months, and then we will be bringing in another incredible piece from our quilt and coverlet collection. This is a coverlet that was designed and woven by a St. Charles weaver named John Schneider, And this piece is dated 1872. Schneider's work as a weaver was not just to make functional pieces, but he was truly an artist who was gifted with color and composition. This piece down here in the corner is part of our next feature gallery exhibition. It's called Made in STL, and it will be a look at the companies, the products, the people who have made things or created ideas right here in St. Louis that have shaped not just the city, but the country and the world as well. And so all of the great St. Louis manufacturing stories will be there. The shoe industry, the brick making, but also stories you might not expect to see about folks like Mary Engelbreit, the designer who created those iconic illustrations and products in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, and is still active in St. Louis today. And then, of course, we'll be rotating in new photographs to the Prints and Photograph space that showcase the Carrington collection and the really beautiful, unique insights into everyday life through Carrington's photographic lenses. And this is one of my favorites that will be coming soon to the gallery. It's just this brief moment in time where a mom is fixing her daughter's hair as she plans to go into a debutante ball here in St. Louis. So these are just a few of the many things that you can see and collected if you come back over the coming months, and I hope that you do.